This is Pastor Jeff. I'm the pastor of Church Online. We're a unique online community of faith. We have people from all over the United States who join us on a regular basis for Bible study and for church. You can find us at churchonline.com, but we spell that uniquely CHRCH. churchonline.com. This morning, I actually had a completely different thing that I wanted to talk to you about, but I was interrupted by a really interesting article, something that really made me think. And that doesn't happen very often, but I woke up early this morning checking my emails, and there's a link to an article by a pastor, Tim Keller. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Tim Keller. He's written a whole lot of books and had to step away from his pastorate because of cancer, but has done a lot of writing. And among other things, he's really concerned with evangelism. Evangelism, what does it look like today to reach our neighbors? And in this article, he said some really fascinating things that I wanted to share. But first thing, it had to do with us losing the front porch. Now, what does that mean? I don't know about you, but when I grew up, people sat out on their front porches. Neighborhoods. We had block parties and we got to know one another. Today, that's not the truth. We don't see people. In fact, I can look out the window of my office right now and I could see two homes, and both of them have small front porches. We don't build out here in Nevada, we don't build houses with big front porches, but we've got a little front porch. But I can't tell you the last time I actually saw any of my neighbors out on the front porch. Oh, I might catch my neighbors if they're working in their front yard or loading up their car to go somewhere, but I rarely ever see anyone just hanging out on the front porch. Now, that's what Tim Keller said. The church has somewhat lost this front porch mentality. Meaning, think about it this way. When was the last time you saw an individual that was honestly hurting and broken? I don't know, maybe somebody's going through marriage problems. Maybe they're having issues with their teenagers, and their first thought is, let's go to church. Now, I'm talking about not church-going people already. I'm talking about unchurched non-believers. How often would they just naturally wake up and go, it's Sunday morning and my life's falling apart. I think I need to be in church. The truth is that doesn't happen. And he says it has to do with this loss of the front porch. Now, he says, Tim Keller, he says in the article that the society itself, all of Western society, had four fundamental beliefs that acted as a front porch. In other words, you may not be a follower of Jesus, you may not go to church, but there was a few things that you just knew. And those four things: number one, there is a God who can be known, who created us and who judges us. Number two, there's some kind of moral objective standards by which God does judge. Number three, no one lives up to the standard perfectly, so we all need forgiveness. We would call that sin. And then the fourth thing is there is an afterlife, there is a heaven, and there is a hell. And evangelism used to be just simply connecting the dots in people's minds. Well, you know that there is a heaven and a hell. You believe that there is a holy God who has set his standard. So what we need to do is find that way to him and for being forgiven by him. And then we introduce people to Jesus and say his cross was the thing that our sin separated us, and his cross was the thing that bridges that divide, that bridges that gap. That was evangelism. But what do we do when there's no front porch? There's no common ground. What do we do when someone that we're speaking to doesn't believe one of these four basic things? For example, you may ask somebody, well, do you know if you're going to heaven? Do you know where you're going in the afterlife? And a friend, a colleague, a coworker, a family member, they may say, well, I don't believe in heaven or hell. And for that matter, I don't believe in God. Well, how do we possibly bridge that gap? Of course, today, one of the big ones is a lot of people don't believe that there is a moral standard. Well, what's right for you isn't necessarily right for me. There is no moral standard. Other people would say that, well, there is no sin. What I do is right for me, and what you do is right for you. Again, how do we get on the front porch? How do we get individuals and find the common ground? Well, Tim Keller in his article really goes back to those fundamentals that churches, believers in Jesus Christ, we need to make front porches again. We need to be out on the front porch talking to people, creating relationships with people. Yes, directing the conversation toward Him, toward those four things, but then helping people to understand and believe those things to be true. What I would suggest is we got to go back to the basics. We've got to go back to what the early church looked like. Because if you remember, when Christ came and rose again, 50 days later at Pentecost, brought his spirit to us, most of the people in the world did not believe those four things either. The majority of the world at that point were pagan worshipers. If you would say, well, there is a God and he can be known and he created you and he judges you, and they would look at you and say, well, which God? Because they believed in multiple gods. Heaven and a hell, well, they believed in those things too, but the gods controlled all of those things. So the reality is we have to get back to what the early church was about, and Acts is the perfect place to look. Let me give you one of my favorite sections in the book of Acts is the snapshot of the early church, and it sounds like this. Acts 2:42 through 47. They they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, in breaking of bread and prayers. And then faith came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor of all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who are being saved. I love that last line. They added to their number daily those who are being saved. And really, all that they were doing was being the community that God created them to be. That first line talks about the apostles' teaching, the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. They broke bread. They prayed. They exercised all of the foundational things upon that the faith was based upon. They had the front porch because they were meeting together in the temple. We know that they met in this area called Solomon's Porch or Solomon's Colonnade. So they were in the public eye and people saw them and they saw things that would happen. Now, the big one to me has always been verse 46. They continued daily in one accord in the temple, like I said, breaking bread from house to house. They ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. So they opened their homes. And if we read this correctly, they didn't just open their homes to other members of the church. Well, they had to have opened their homes to unbelievers. Or else, how would this matter? How would this be understood? So they opened their homes. They were in one accord in the temple. They broke bread from house to house and they gave. All of those things are ways that we open the front porch of faith, even to someone who would say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe there's a heaven and a hell. But if they can see God at work in us, if they could see God at work in our churches, if we could open that front porch and be a place where people could feel safe, a place where people could feel welcome, then maybe we would see that last line, and the Lord added to the church daily those who are being saved.